A millionaire saw an orphan girl sleeping in the greenhouse of his mansion and brought her inside. When he came home early, he could not hold back his tears when he saw what she had done for his blind brother. The rain hammered against the glass panels of the Carter mansion's greenhouse, each drop a desperate rhythm in the dead of night. Emma Parker, barely 13, pressed her thin frame against the door, her fingers trembling as they found the latch unexpectedly unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roses and earth, a stark contrast to the harsh world she'd fled. Her soaked clothes dripped onto the stone floor as she clutched a weathered photograph to her chest, the only reminder of her mother she had left. The accusation of theft still rang in her ears. "Thief, we saw you take it." But they were wrong. They were all wrong. The music box had been her mother's last gift, yet they'd taken even that from her. The soft moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, casting ethereal shadows among the carefully tended plants. In the corner stood a grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the occasional flash of lightning. Emma's feet moved of their own accord, drawn to the instrument like a moth to flame. Her fingers, cold and wet, hovered over the keys. "Don't even think about it," the deep voice cut through the darkness, causing Emma to stumble backward. Michael Carter stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted by a flash of lightning. His hand gripped a lantern, its warm glow revealing his stern expression. "This is private property." Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. "Please," she whispered, "I just needed shelter from the rain. I'm not stealing anything. I promise." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she clutched the photograph tighter. Michael stepped closer, the lantern's light catching the tears streaming down Emma's face. His expression softened as he noticed her bruised arms and the dark circles under her eyes. But before he could speak, a haunting melody drifted through the air coming from the main house. Emma's eyes widened. "That's Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor," she breathed, momentarily forgetting her fear. "My mother used to play that." The music stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of something crashing. "Ethan," Michael muttered, concern etching his features. He looked back at the shivering girl, torn between duty to his brother and the clear distress of this child before him. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the rain-streaked greenhouse and the unlikely pair within a wealthy businessman and a runaway orphan, brought together by fate and a shared connection to music that would change their lives forever. If this opening scene touched your heart and sparked your curiosity, there's much more to come. Join our community of storytellers by subscribing. Together, we'll explore more tales that capture the power of music, family, and redemption. Every subscription fuels our passion to create meaningful stories. The Carter mansion stood like a silent guardian at the edge of Millbrook, its Victorian architecture a testament to old money and forgotten glory. Built in 1897 by Thomas Carter, a railroad tycoon with a passion for music, the estate had been designed around its crowning jewel, a magnificent greenhouse that served as both conservatory and concert hall. The mansion's history was as complex as its architecture. For generations, it had housed the Carter family's musical legacy, its halls echoing with melodies from countless performances and celebrations. The greenhouse, with its soaring glass ceiling and perfect acoustics, had hosted some of the most renowned pianists of the early 20th century. But the past decade had stripped the mansion of its vibrancy. The once bustling halls had grown silent, the grand rooms collected dust, and the greenhouse's splendor dimmed under Martha Bennett's solitary care. The elderly housekeeper remained the only constant in a house that had forgotten how to sing. The change had begun the night of the accident. Ethan Carter, then a celebrated concert pianist following in his family's footsteps, had been driving home from a performance when he swerved to avoid a child who had darted into the road. His car had rolled several times, leaving him blind, and the child, despite his sacrifice, did not survive. The tragedy had shattered more than just Ethan's career, it had broken the mansion's spirit. Michael Carter, the older brother and successful businessman, had tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. He'd converted part of the mansion into his home office, managing his investment firm while keeping a watchful eye on his increasingly reclusive brother. But even his efforts couldn't prevent the estate from slipping into a grey melancholy. The greenhouse, once the heart of the mansion's musical life, became Ethan's self-imposed prison. He would spend hours there, running his fingers over the keys of the grand piano, playing fragments of melodies that seemed to carry all the pain he couldn't express in words. The beautiful space that had once hosted elegant soirees now witnessed only solitary suffering. Martha watched it all with a heavy heart, maintaining the greenhouse's collection of rare plants more out of duty than joy. She remembered the days when music students would flock to take lessons from Ethan, when the garden parties would spill from the main house into the greenhouse, when laughter and piano music would mingle with the perfume of blooming flowers. The locals whispered about the Carter mansion, creating stories about the reclusive pianist and his protective older brother. Some said the greenhouse was haunted by the spirit of the child Ethan couldn't save. Others claimed to hear phantom piano music late at night, carrying traces of the brilliance that once was. But beyond the gossip and rumors lay a deeper truth: the mansion had become a symbol of interrupted dreams and unfinished symphonies. Its grand rooms held the weight of silence, its corridors echoed with unspoken words, and its greenhouse stood as a glass cage for a man who had lost not just his sight, but his reason for living. It was into this world of suspended grief that Emma Parker would stumble, bringing with her a storm that would shake the very foundations of the Carter legacy. The mansion, like its inhabitants, stood at the precipice of change, waiting for someone to remind it of the music it had forgotten how to play. Before darkness claimed his world, Ethan Carter had been a rising star in classical music. At 35, he had already performed at Carnegie Hall, earned international acclaim, and was known for his emotional interpretations of Chopin and Rachmaninoff. His hands could coax stories from the keys, turning musical notes into living, breathing emotions that left audiences spellbound. Sarah Mitchell, a promising young pianist, had been his most gifted student and eventually the love of his life. Their relationship blossomed over shared passions and dreams, their duets becoming legendary in local music circles. Sarah's dedication to teaching underprivileged children matched Ethan's own belief in music's power to transform lives. Together, they planned to establish a music school for talented children who couldn't afford proper training. But fate had other plans. Sarah discovered she was pregnant just as her career was taking off. Despite the challenges, they embraced the news with joy, dreaming of a child who would inherit their love for music. However, complications during pregnancy forced Sarah to choose between her life and their unborn child. She chose to give birth, leaving Ethan with a daughter and a void that seemed impossible to fill. Unable to cope with single parenthood while maintaining his demanding career, Ethan made the heartbreaking decision to place their daughter in adoption, promising himself he would reclaim her when he was more stable. This decision haunted him daily, adding a new depth of emotion to his performances that critics called hauntingly beautiful. The accident happened on a rainy night, much like the one that would later bring Emma to his greenhouse. Driving home from a benefit concert, Ethan spotted a child chasing a ball onto the road. In the split second he had to react, memories of his own daughter flashed through his mind. He swerved violently, his car spinning out of control and rolling several times. When he awoke in the hospital, his world had gone dark. The doctors spoke of severe damage to his optic nerves, but all Ethan could think about was the child. Learning that the boy hadn't survived, despite his sacrifice, sent him into a spiral of depression. The guilt became unbearable. He had failed to save this child just as he had failed his own daughter. The music world mourned the loss of his talent, but Ethan retreated into himself, refusing visitors and eventually moving into the isolated wing of the Carter mansion. His piano became both solace and torment. He could still play from memory, but each note reminded him of what he'd lost. The greenhouse became his sanctuary, its plants providing silent companionship as he grappled with his demons. Michael watched helplessly as his younger brother transformed from a vibrant artist into a bitter recluse. He hired the best specialists, arranged for innovative treatments, but Ethan rejected them all. The once charming musician who had captivated audiences worldwide now communicated only through angry notes demanding to be left alone. Few knew that Ethan spent his sleepless nights searching for news of his daughter through private investigators, though his blindness made him dependent on others to read their reports. Each dead end deepened his depression, convincing him that he deserved this darkness as punishment for abandoning her. Years passed, and Ethan's legend grew in his absence. Music students still spoke of his recordings with reverence, unaware that their idol spent his days in a self-imposed exile, playing fragments of the same pieces that had once made him famous. His grand piano, positioned perfectly in the greenhouse's natural acoustics, became both his anchor to sanity and a reminder of everything he had lost. This was the Ethan that Emma would encounter, a man who had lost not just his sight, but his hope, his music, and his very reason for being. Yet in the cruel irony of fate, this broken man would soon face a truth that would shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed solitude. At St. Catherine's Home for Children, Emma Parker was known as the piano girl, the quiet 13-year-old who would sneak into the chapel after hours to play the old upright piano. Her entire world was contained in a worn photograph of her mother, Sarah Mitchell, seated at a grand piano, and a small music box that played Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor. Life at the orphanage hadn't always been harsh. When Emma first arrived at age 8, following her grandmother's death, the nuns had been kind. Sister Mary Grace even arranged for her to practice on the chapel piano, recognizing the raw talent in the grieving child. Those early days were filled with hope, as Emma clung to memories of her mother through music. But everything changed when Rebecca Wells arrived. The new administrator brought strict rules and budget cuts, transforming St. Catherine's from a haven into a cold institution. Music was deemed a waste of time, the chapel was locked after hours, and Emma's practice sessions were terminated. Still, she would find ways to play, her fingers dancing silently on windowsills, keeping her mother's legacy alive. The tragedy began with a missing donation, a valuable brooch belonging to one of the orphanage's wealthy patrons. Rebecca Wells, without evidence, accused Emma, citing her late-night wanderings as proof of suspicious behavior. The other children, eager to curry favor with the administration, joined in the persecution. False stories emerged about Emma stealing small items from other orphans. The music box became the final straw. It was Emma's most precious possession, her only birthday gift from her mother. When another girl claimed it had been stolen from her grandmother, Rebecca Wells didn't hesitate. Despite Emma's tears and protestations, the music box was confiscated and given to the accuser. That night, Emma overheard plans to send her to a stricter facility for troubled youth. The betrayal cut deep, but it was the whispers that hurt the most. Like mother, like daughter, they said, spreading rumors that Sarah Mitchell had been a thief who'd stolen from her wealthy music students. Emma knew the truth. Her mother had been a dedicated teacher who gave free lessons to underprivileged children, often going without meals to buy sheet music for her students. On the night she fled, Emma took only two things: her mother's photograph and a newspaper clipping about a renowned pianist named Ethan Carter. The article mentioned his work with underprivileged music students, and something about his story resonated with Emma's memories of her mother's stories. It was this connection, though she didn't yet understand its significance, that led her to seek shelter in his greenhouse. Behind her, she left a life of false accusations and broken dreams. Her few defenders, Sister Mary Grace and two younger girls she had taught simple piano tunes, were powerless against the tide of persecution. The other children, many nursing their own wounds from life's cruelties, found it easier to join the majority than stand with the accused. Emma carried more than just her meager possessions as she ran through the rain that night. She carried her mother's passion for music, her unshakable belief in its power to heal, and a determination to prove her innocence. The weight of injustice bent her shoulders but couldn't break her spirit. What she couldn't know was that her path to the Carter mansion's greenhouse was more than just a desperate bid for shelter. It was the first step in a journey that would unravel long-buried secrets, heal old wounds, and bring music back to lives that had forgotten how to sing. For in the cruelest twist of fate, Emma Parker was about to discover that the connection between her mother and Ethan Carter ran deeper than any article could reveal. The ghost of Sarah Mitchell's music lingered in both their hearts, waiting for the moment when past and present would collide in a symphony of truth and redemption. The morning after Emma's arrival brought an unfamiliar tension to the Carter mansion. Michael, against Martha's cautious advice, had allowed the girl to stay in one of the guest rooms. Her presence, like a pebble dropped in still water, sent ripples through the household's carefully maintained routine. Martha found herself instinctively setting an extra place at breakfast, the china clinking with uncertainty as she arranged it. The sound of small feet padding down the hallway, so foreign in this adult world, made her pause in her morning duties. Emma moved like a ghost, careful not to disturb the mansion's somber atmosphere, but her very existence brought color to the gray-scaled world they'd inhabited for so long. The first real change came through music. In the early hours, when she thought everyone was asleep, Emma would slip into the greenhouse. Her fingers would drift over the piano keys, barely pressing them, creating whispers of melody that seemed to make the flowers lean closer. The plants, under Martha's careful tending, had grown used to silence. Now they swayed to the gentle notes of Chopin's preludes, played with a delicacy that spoke of both skill and fear of discovery. Ethan, in his isolated wing, noticed the change immediately. The greenhouse's acoustics carried every note to his room, each melody a reminder of what he'd lost. At first he responded with angry notes to Michael, demanding the girl's removal. But there was something in her playing a familiar touch, a way of interpreting the emotional crescendos that made him pause mid-sentence while dictating his complaints. The mansion itself seemed to breathe differently. Dust motes danced in sunbeams that had long been blocked by heavy curtains, now drawn back by Emma's innocent curiosity. The grand staircase, which had forgotten the sound of running feet, creaked in surprise at her light steps. Even the ancient grandfather clock in the hall appeared to tick with more purpose, as if counting moments toward something rather than away from memories. Michael found himself lingering in his home office, door slightly ajar, listening for the snippets of music that would float through the house. He caught himself smiling at the sight of Emma's school books spread across the kitchen table, her careful handwriting bringing life to spaces that had served only utilitarian purposes for years. The greenhouse flourished under the new energy. Martha noticed the roses blooming more vibrantly, their petals reaching toward the piano like audiences of old. The orchids, Ethan's mother's pride, displayed colors they hadn't shown in years. It was as if the plants themselves recognized the return of music to their domain. But it was the night sounds that marked the greatest change. Instead of the hollow echo of empty halls, the mansion now held the soft harmonies of Emma's practice sessions, the quiet humming as she did her homework, the gentle click of her bedroom door. These small domestic sounds created a new rhythm, a heartbeat the house had forgotten it needed. The staff, reduced to Martha and a part-time groundskeeper since Ethan's accident, found themselves sharing glances of cautious hope. They witnessed the gradual transformation of cold rooms into lived spaces, sterile silence into musical whispers. Emma's presence didn't erase the mansion's shadows, but she brought a light that made them less absolute. Even the photographs on the walls generations of Carters captured in formal poses seemed to watch the young girl with increasing interest. Their stern expressions remained unchanged, but somehow their presence felt less judgmental, as if they too recognized the need for youth and music in these ancient halls. For the first time in years, the Carter mansion began to remember its original purpose, not as a mausoleum for lost dreams, but as a home where music and life could flourish together. Emma's impact, though gentle as a piano's softest note, was undeniable. The question remaining was whether this fragile new harmony could survive the storm that was brewing in Ethan's wing of the house. Ethan's response to Emma's presence manifested like a crescendo of hostility. His first note to Michael, delivered by Martha in the early morning hours, was "Terse, remove her. This is not a shelter for strays." When Michael ignored this demand, the notes became more frequent, their tone increasingly bitter. In the greenhouse, Ethan would deliberately play during Emma's attempted practice sessions, his powerful technique drowning out her tentative melodies. His selections grew progressively darker: Chopin's most turbulent nocturnes, Beethoven's storm movements, Liszt's demonic etudes. It was a musical warfare meant to intimidate and discourage. Martha watched with growing concern as Ethan's behavior became more erratic. He refused meals when Emma was in the house, waited until midnight to venture into the greenhouse, and responded to any mention of the girl with cold, cutting remarks. "This house is not a playground," he would snap. "It's not a place for childish dreams and amateur playing." One morning, Emma found the piano locked. When she asked Martha about it, the housekeeper could only shake her head sadly. "Don't take it personally, child. Mr. Ethan, he's been through more than you know." But Emma had seen the key in Ethan's hand as he passed through the greenhouse the night before, his unseeing eyes somehow finding hers with uncanny accuracy. Michael's attempts at mediation met with fierce resistance. During one particularly heated confrontation, Ethan hurled a vase against the wall. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "Every note she plays, every sound of her existence here, it's like echoes of everything I've lost. I can't bear it, Michael. I won't." The tension peaked when Emma discovered sheet music hidden in the greenhouse original compositions by Ethan, dated before his accident. As she began to play one, a haunting piece filled with longing and hope, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face contorted with rage. "How dare you touch those?" he thundered. "Those aren't for your amateur hands to butcher." Emma's tearful apology only seemed to fuel his anger. "You think you can just walk in here and claim this space? This was my sanctuary before you invaded it with your presence, your playing. It's a mockery of what this place used to be." His words, sharp as broken glass, cut deep into Emma's already wounded spirit. Martha found Emma later that night, curled up in the kitchen, still clutching the photograph of her mother. "Perhaps I should leave," the girl whispered. "I'm only causing trouble here," but there was something in her voice, a familiar determination that made Martha pause. It was the same tone Sarah Mitchell had used when facing adversity. Ethan's resistance took a physical toll on him. His hands shook more frequently, his playing became erratic, and dark circles formed under his unseeing eyes. Michael noticed his brother losing weight, retreating further into himself. The few times Ethan did speak, his words carried a desperate edge, as if he were fighting not just against Emma's presence, but against something deeper, something he couldn't or wouldn't name. Yet even in his rejection, there were moments of unconscious connection. Late at night, when he thought the house was empty, Ethan would sometimes pause in his playing, head tilted, listening to the faint echoes of Emma's earlier practice sessions. His fingers would find those same melodies, playing them with a gentleness that contradicted his daylight hostility. The greenhouse, caught between two musicians, became a battleground of emotions. During the day, it witnessed Ethan's attempts to reclaim his territory through thunderous playing. At night, it held Emma's quiet determination as she practiced silently, her fingers moving above the keys without pressing them. The plants swayed between these opposing forces, while the grand piano stood silent witness to a conflict that ran deeper than anyone yet understood. The revelation came on a stormy evening, echoing the night of Emma's arrival. Martha was cleaning the greenhouse, dusting the piano's glossy surface, when she discovered an old program tucked between the strings. The paper was yellowed, its edges worn, but the names were still clear: Joint Recital, Ethan Carter and Sarah Mitchell. Her hands trembling, Martha compared the photograph Emma treasured to the program's grainy image. There was no doubt the woman at the piano, smiling beside a younger Ethan, was Emma's mother. The date showed it was from 15 years ago, just before Sarah Mitchell had disappeared from the music scene. Michael found Martha sitting in his office, the program laid carefully on his desk. "Mr. Michael," she whispered, "you need to see this." As he examined the evidence, pieces began falling into place: Sarah's sudden departure, Ethan's intense reaction to Emma's playing, the familiar touch in her interpretation of Chopin. The search through old records revealed more connections. Letters between Ethan and Sarah spoke of shared dreams, plans for a music school for underprivileged children. Their relationship had blossomed beyond teacher and student, but the last letter was unfinished, dated just before Sarah's disappearance. Emma, unaware of the discovery, continued her evening ritual of silent practice in the greenhouse. That night she played a piece she'd learned from her mother, a unique arrangement of Chopin's Nocturne. In his wing, Ethan froze mid-motion, recognition flooding his features. Only one other person had ever played that arrangement that way. When Michael approached Ethan with the truth, the reaction was volcanic. "No," Ethan roared, sweeping his arm across the table, sending papers flying. "She can't be. I would have known. Sarah would have told me." But his voice cracked on her name, betraying the doubt that had taken root. Martha found letters in Sarah's old music folder, never sent, never read. They revealed the truth. Sarah had discovered she was pregnant shortly after Ethan's rising career had taken him abroad. Proud and independent, she had chosen to raise their child alone, not wanting to burden his promising future with responsibility. The final letter, dated just before her death, contained a confession and a request: "If anything happens to me, please tell Ethan about Emma. She has his gift, his passion for music. She deserves to know her father." The letter had never reached its destination, lost in the chaos of Sarah's sudden illness and death. As Michael read the letters aloud, Ethan sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. Every note Emma had played in the greenhouse suddenly took on new meaning. They were echoes of Sarah, yes, but also of himself. His own daughter had been playing his piano, and he had tried to silence her. Emma, still unaware, continued to practice in the greenhouse, her fingers finding the same patterns her father had discovered years ago. The similarity in their playing, once a source of irritation for Ethan, now became unbearable evidence of their connection. Martha watched the impact of this revelation ripple through the household. The photograph of Sarah that Emma cherished now sat beside an old picture of Ethan at the same age, their features matching in ways too precise to deny. The music that had divided them suddenly became proof of their shared blood. Michael struggled with how to reveal the truth. Emma's description of her mother's dedication to teaching underprivileged children, her passion for Chopin, even her habit of humming while she practiced, all were traits she shared with Ethan from before his accident. The truth was written in every note she played. The greenhouse, once Ethan's sanctuary and then his prison, now held a new significance. It was where his daughter had instinctively sought shelter, drawn perhaps by some unconscious recognition. The piano that had witnessed his descent into darkness now held the key to his redemption through the daughter he never knew he had. The morning after the discovery, rain streaked the greenhouse windows like tears. Emma sat at the piano, unaware of the turmoil her existence had caused, playing a piece she'd written herself. The melody carried echoes of Chopin's style, but there was something uniquely her own in the composition, a blend of melancholy and hope that seemed to capture the essence of her journey. Martha stood in the doorway, the weight of knowledge heavy on her shoulders, watching as the girl's fingers danced across the keys. The piece built slowly, like a story being told note by note. It spoke of loss, of searching, of finding home in music when the world offered no shelter. The housekeeper recognized Sarah's influence in the phrasing, but there was something else, something undeniably reminiscent of Ethan's early compositions. Unknown to Emma, Ethan had positioned himself in the connecting corridor, his unseeing eyes closed as he listened. Each note seemed to pierce the walls he'd built around his heart. The composition was raw, unpolished, but carried an emotional truth that he hadn't heard since Sarah. His hands unconsciously moved in sync with the melody, muscle memory recognizing patterns he himself had once taught her mother. The breakthrough came when Emma reached a particularly challenging section. She faltered, the music stuttering to a halt. In the silence that followed, Ethan found himself moving forward, drawn by an instinct stronger than his fear. "The left hand needs to support the melody there," he said quietly, his first words to her that weren't filled with anger. "Try it again, but let your fingers tell the story." Emma froze, startled by his presence, but something in his voice, a gentleness she hadn't heard before, gave her courage. She began again, incorporating his suggestion. The difference was immediate. The melody soared, supported by a foundation that gave it wings. Ethan nodded, moving closer to the piano. Now, in the middle section, he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Think of it as a conversation. The right hand asks a question, the left hand answers." He demonstrated on the lower octaves, his touch still perfect despite his blindness. Emma watched in wonder as his fingers found the keys without hesitation. Together they worked through the piece, teacher and student, father and daughter, though neither yet knew the full truth of their connection. The greenhouse filled with their combined music, the plants seeming to lean in, witnesses to this first moment of harmony. Martha had slipped away, tears in her eyes, to find Michael. When they returned, they found an extraordinary scene. Ethan was seated beside Emma at the piano, guiding her through a complex passage, their hands moving in perfect synchronization. The bitterness that had characterized his features for so long had softened, replaced by an expression of deep concentration. As the sun broke through the clouds, Emma's composition took on new life. What had begun as a solo piece transformed into a duet, Ethan's bass notes providing a framework for her melody. The music spoke of something greater than individual pain. It carried the possibility of healing, of bridges being built over chasms of loss. Michael watched as his brother came alive through teaching, remembering how Ethan had once dreamed of nurturing young talent. Emma absorbed every suggestion with an eagerness that spoke of years of hunger for proper guidance. Their shared passion for music had broken through barriers that words could not touch. The piece ended with a delicate series of arpeggios, like questions left hanging in the air. In the silence that followed, Ethan remained seated beside Emma, his hands still on the keys. "You have a gift," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "It would be a shame to let it go to waste." It was more than just a musical breakthrough. It was the first crack in the wall Ethan had built around himself. Emma's simple thank you carried years of longing for acceptance, for understanding. But the greenhouse, which had witnessed so much pain, now held the first notes of what promised to be a new symphony. Martha quietly arranged tea and cookies on a small table nearby, her hands shaking slightly as she witnessed this transformation. The morning light streamed through the glass panels, casting warm patterns across the piano, across the unlikely pair who had found common ground in music's universal language. The days following Emma's breakthrough brought subtle but significant changes to Ethan's behavior. His angry notes to Michael ceased. Instead, he began leaving sheet music on the piano, carefully selected pieces that challenged yet encouraged Emma's growing abilities. Each morning, Martha would find new compositions placed with deliberate care, their pages marked with raised dots that only Ethan could read. In the evenings, his criticism of Emma's playing transformed from harsh dismissals to constructive guidance. "Your timing needs work," he would say, his voice firm but no longer cruel. "Listen to how the phrases should flow." He would demonstrate, his fingers finding the keys with unerring accuracy, muscle memory unchanged by his blindness. The greenhouse became their shared sanctuary. Emma would arrive from school, and Ethan would emerge from his wing, drawn by the sound of her practice. Their sessions grew longer, more intense, filled with technical exercises and discussions of musical interpretation. Martha noticed how Ethan's posture changed during these times, the tension in his shoulders easing, his face softening into expressions she hadn't seen since before the accident. One rainy afternoon, Emma was struggling with a particularly difficult passage of Rachmaninoff. Frustration colored her playing, making her fingers stumble over the complex rhythms. Ethan, listening from his usual spot, did something unprecedented. He laughed. Not mockingly, but with genuine warmth. "You sound exactly like your," he caught himself, the word mother dying on his lips. Instead, he moved to the piano bench. "Let me show you a trick I learned years ago." The physical barrier between them began to crumble. Ethan no longer flinched when Emma's sleeve brushed his arm during their duets. He allowed her to guide his hand to his teacup, accepting her help with a grace that surprised everyone. Small gestures of trust replaced his former resistance, like winter ice yielding to spring's warmth. Michael observed these changes with cautious hope. He saw how Ethan's face would turn toward the sound of Emma's footsteps, how he would pause in his own playing to listen to her practice. The brother who had rejected all human connection was slowly, unconsciously, forming bonds he couldn't yet acknowledge. Even Ethan's compositions began to change. The dark, turbulent pieces that had characterized his post-accident work gave way to something different. Martha found him one morning, working on a new piece that contained elements of Emma's style, lighter, more hopeful phrases woven through his complex harmonies. When she commented on it, he merely nodded, but his fingers kept returning to those brighter passages. The transformation extended beyond music. Ethan started taking meals in the main dining room, timing his appearance to coincide with Emma's dinner hour. Though he spoke little, he listened intently to her stories about school, about her dreams of becoming a concert pianist. His occasional comments revealed how carefully he was paying attention to every detail she shared. One evening, Emma was playing a piece she'd learned from her mother's old notes. Ethan sat motionless, tears streaming down his face, though Emma couldn't see them from her position at the piano. The melody carried echoes of Sarah's touch, but the interpretation was uniquely Emma's, a bridge between past and present that touched something deep in Ethan's wounded heart. Martha found him later that night in the greenhouse, his fingers tracing the piano's keys without pressing them. "She has Sarah's gift," he whispered, not turning as Martha approached. "But there's something else there too. Something that reminds me of." He couldn't finish the thought, but Martha understood. Emma's playing carried echoes of both her parents, though only 3 people in the house knew this truth. The final evidence of Ethan's change came in the form of a request to Michael. "Find her a proper teacher," he said one evening, "someone who can take her further than I can. She needs every opportunity to develop her talent." The admission of his limitations, spoken without bitterness, showed how far he had come from the man who had tried to silence Emma's music. Yet beneath this gradual thaw, a storm was brewing. Each day brought Ethan closer to a truth he wasn't prepared to face. Every note Emma played was a reminder of Sarah, of choices made and paths not taken. His growing attachment to her carried an unconscious recognition that both thrilled and terrified him. The question wasn't if the truth would emerge, but when and whether the fragile piece they'd built could survive its revelation. Michael Carter sat in his study late one night, surrounded by documents that would change multiple lives. Adoption papers lay spread across his mahogany desk, their legal terminology stark against the warm lamplight. The decision had been building for weeks, crystallizing each time he watched Emma and Ethan at the piano, each time he saw the mansion coming back to life. The catalyst had come that morning. Emma's school had called. There was an issue with her temporary guardian status. The orphanage was demanding her return, citing unauthorized absence. Rebecca Wells had filed a formal complaint, painting Emma as a troubled runaway who had stolen valuable items before her departure. The accusations were clearly false, but they carried the weight of institutional authority. Martha had found Michael staring at Sarah's photograph, lost in thought. "Mr. Michael," she said softly, "that child belongs here." We all know it. Her words echoed what his heart had been telling him since the night Emma first played in their greenhouse. The mansion needed her as much as she needed a home. The legal challenges were substantial. As a single man with a demanding career and a complicated home situation, he wasn't the ideal candidate for adoption. His lawyers advised against it, citing potential complications with his business reputation. The presence of his blind, reclusive brother could be seen as an unstable environment for a child. Yet Michael couldn't forget Emma's face when she played the piano, the way she had brought light back into their shadowed halls. He thought of her careful consideration for Ethan, how she adapted her practice schedule to his moods, her intuitive understanding of when to push and when to retreat. She had unconsciously begun healing wounds that had festered for years. The financial implications were the least of his concerns. His wealth could provide Emma with every opportunity: the best music teachers, top schools, a future secure from want. But it was the intangible gifts she had already brought to their home that convinced him: the return of music, the softening of Ethan's bitterness, the warmth that had begun to pervade their once cold halls. Late that evening, he called Emma into his study. She entered hesitantly, her small frame tense with the fear of rejection she had known too often. Michael gestured to the chair across from his desk, trying to project calm despite his own nervousness. "Emma," he began, "I need to ask you something important." He explained the situation with the orphanage, watching as shadows of fear crossed her face. But before they could take root, he continued, "I would like to adopt you, to make this your permanent home, legally and in every other way." The silence that followed was profound. Emma's hands twisted in her lap, tears filling her eyes. "But why?" she whispered. "I'm just a stranger who broke into your greenhouse. I've caused so much trouble with Mr. Ethan, and your life was peaceful before." Michael moved around the desk, kneeling beside her chair. "You haven't caused trouble, Emma. You've brought music back to a house that had forgotten how to sing. You've given Ethan a reason to teach again. You've made this place feel like a home." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I would be honored to be your father." The tears spilled over then, years of longing for family breaking through Emma's careful composure. She launched herself into Michael's arms, sobbing out her acceptance. Martha, watching from the doorway, quietly wiped her own eyes before slipping away to prepare Emma's favorite cookies. The next morning, Michael began the formal adoption process. His lawyers were instructed to expedite everything, to fight any opposition from the orphanage. He hired investigators to disprove the theft accusations, determined to clear Emma's name completely. The most delicate task was informing Ethan. Michael found his brother in the greenhouse, working on a new composition. "I'm adopting Emma," he said simply, waiting for the explosion of protest. Instead, Ethan's fingers stilled on the keys. "Good," he said quietly. "She needs stability to develop her talent properly." That simple acceptance was the final confirmation Michael needed. He threw himself into the adoption preparations with the same intensity he brought to his business dealings. Emma's room was renovated, transformed from a guest space into a teenager's haven, complete with a digital piano for late-night practice. Martha helped Emma select new clothes, books, and school supplies, each purchase a step toward permanence. The girl's tentative joy at these simple possessions spoke volumes about her past deprivation. She treated each new item with reverent care, still half afraid it might be taken away. As Michael signed the final preliminary papers, he glanced out his study window at the greenhouse. Emma was there, playing a duet with Ethan, their music flowing seamlessly together. The sight confirmed what his heart already knew: this wasn't just about providing a home for an orphaned girl. It was about completing their broken family, about healing wounds that went deeper than any of them yet realized. Millbrook Academy's imposing Gothic architecture loomed before Emma on her first day. Michael had chosen the prestigious private school for its excellent music program, but within hours, it became clear that excellence came with its own price. Emma, in her newly bought uniform that still felt stiff and foreign, stood out immediately among students who had generations of privilege behind them. The whispers started during her first piano class. She played a complex piece from memory, her technique reflecting Ethan's recent tutoring. The music room fell silent, other students exchanging glances. Her talent, rather than earning admiration, sparked immediate resentment. Showing off already, one girl muttered, "Typical scholarship case." Victoria Blackwood, daughter of the school's biggest donor, became Emma's primary tormentor. She'd held the position of top piano student until Emma's arrival, and her displeasure manifested in subtle but cruel ways. Sheet music would go missing before performances. Practice room bookings would mysteriously disappear. Small accidents seemed to happen whenever Emma prepared for recitals. The truth about Emma's past leaked somehow, probably through the school administration. Soon whispered rumors circulated about the thief from St. Catherine's. Victoria made sure everyone knew about the accusations, embellishing the story with each telling. "I heard she stole jewelry from the nuns" became a common corridor whisper. Mrs. Henderson, the music teacher, proved an unexpected ally. She recognized Emma's rare talent and refused to let social politics interfere with musical development. "Talent speaks for itself," she would say, assigning Emma increasingly challenging pieces. But even her support had limits within the school's complex social hierarchy. The situation escalated after Emma won the spot for the school's autumn showcase. Victoria, who had performed in the showcase for 3 consecutive years, launched a campaign of intimidation. Notes appeared in Emma's locker: "Orphans don't belong here. Go back to where you came from." Each message carried the weight of unspoken threats. Emma tried to hide her struggles from her new family. She practiced longer hours in the greenhouse, pouring her pain into the music. Ethan, with his heightened sensitivity to emotional nuance in playing, noticed the change. "Your interpretation of Chopin's revolutionary etude has grown darker," he observed one evening. "Music reflects what we can't say in words." The breaking point came during a practice session for the showcase. Emma entered the music room to find the piano strings had been deliberately dampened, a sophisticated act of sabotage that could only have been done by someone with musical knowledge. The discovery brought her to tears, not just from frustration, but from the realization that her talent had made her a target. Michael discovered the truth when Mrs. Henderson called him. The teacher had witnessed Victoria's friends tampering with the piano, but felt powerless against the Blackwood family's influence. Michael's reaction was immediate and fierce. He stormed into the headmaster's office, his reputation as a business titan preceding him. "My daughter deserves better than this," he declared, the word daughter ringing with protective fury. The school board called an emergency meeting. Victoria's father argued that Emma's background made her unsuitable for Millbrook standards. Michael countered by offering to fund a new performing arts center with the condition that admission be based solely on merit. The tension between old money and new values played out in the oak-paneled boardroom. Emma, waiting outside, heard raised voices but couldn't make out the words. Martha had come to sit with her, bringing tea in a thermos and quiet words of encouragement. Sometimes, the housekeeper said, "we must face storms to prove we're strong enough to weather them." When Michael emerged, his expression was grim but satisfied. The school would institute new anti-bullying policies. The showcase would proceed as planned. Victoria would face disciplinary action. But the deeper victory was in Emma's realization that she had someone fighting in her corner, a father who would champion her cause. The following days brought a subtle shift in the school's atmosphere. Victoria's supporters, seeing their leader's power diminish, began to distance themselves. Other students, impressed by Emma's resilience, offered tentative friendship. The practice rooms were suddenly available. The sheet music remained unmolested. Emma channeled everything into preparing for the showcase. Her chosen piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, was ambitious even for advanced students. She practiced with renewed determination, Ethan's guidance helping her infuse the technical brilliance with emotional depth born of recent struggles. The experience changed Emma in unexpected ways. Her playing gained an edge of maturity, a depth that came from confronting adversity. She began to understand that her background, both the pain and the triumph, gave her music something that privilege alone could never provide. Dr. Sarah Thompson sat in the Carter Mansion's library, her expression carefully neutral as she reviewed Ethan's latest test results. The renowned ophthalmologist had been monitoring his case for years, but recent developments had brought a new possibility. "There's a procedure," she explained to Michael, experimental, but showing promising results in similar cases. The medical files spread across the antique desk told a complex story. Ethan's blindness, caused by trauma rather than degenerative disease, had created unique patterns of damage to his optic nerves. Recent advances in neurosurgery, combined with stem cell therapy, offered a small window of hope, but with significant risks. "The success rate is only 30%, Dr. Thompson continued, her voice measured, and there's a 20% chance the procedure could worsen his condition, possibly affecting other neural functions." She paused, letting the statistics sink in, including his ability to play piano. The possibility of losing music entirely struck terror into Ethan's heart. When Michael relayed the information, his brother's hands trembled over the piano keys. "Music is all I have left," he whispered, to risk that the unfinished sentence hung in the air like an unresolved chord. Emma, who had been practicing in the greenhouse, overheard the discussion. She slipped away quietly, but that evening, her playing carried a different quality, a gentle determination that seemed to speak directly to Ethan's fears. The melody she chose, one of his own compositions from before the accident, filled the house with memories of what had been lost and what might be regained. Dr. Thompson recommended they visit her clinic in Boston for detailed evaluations. The journey itself became a challenge. Ethan hadn't left the mansion grounds since his accident. His anxiety manifested in sharp comments and sudden mood swings. Yet when Emma offered to play his favorite pieces on her tablet during the drive, his tension noticeably eased. The clinic's tests were exhaustive. Brain scans, nerve response measurements, countless examinations that left Ethan physically and emotionally drained. Through it all, Emma stayed nearby, her presence a quiet reminder of why he was considering this risk. She would practice finger exercises silently, the soft tapping of her fingers against the waiting room chairs, a familiar rhythm in unfamiliar surroundings. The final consultation brought both hope and heightened anxiety. Dr. Thompson's team had identified Ethan as an ideal candidate for the procedure, but the time window for optimal results was narrow. "We need to operate within the next month," she explained. "The nerve regeneration patterns are optimal now." Martha, who had accompanied them to Boston, watched Ethan wrestle with the decision. Sometimes she told him gently, "Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and moving forward anyway." Her words carried the weight of years spent watching him hide from life. Back at the mansion, Ethan spent long hours in the greenhouse, playing pieces from memory, his fingers seeking answers in the familiar patterns of keys. Emma would sit quietly listening, understanding that his music now spoke of fear, hope, and the terrible space between decisions. The turning point came during a duet practice. Emma stumbled over a difficult passage, and Ethan instinctively reached out to guide her hands. "I wish I could see your progress," he said softly. "I wish I could watch you grow as a musician." In that moment, the decision crystallized not just for himself, but for the chance to be fully present in Emma's musical journey. Michael arranged everything with military precision, the best surgical team, a private recovery room, contingency plans for every possible outcome. But he couldn't plan for the emotional toll of waiting, of watching his brother face the possibility of either salvation or deeper darkness. The night before they were to leave for Boston, Ethan requested a private moment with Emma. "If something goes wrong," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "promise me you'll keep playing. The music, it needs to live on, even if I can't be the one to teach you anymore." Emma's response came through music, a piece she had composed specially for him, weaving themes from his own works with new melodies that spoke of hope and renewal. The greenhouse filled with their combined legacy, teacher and student, each note a prayer for future possibilities. Dr. Thompson's final warning was stark: "Once we begin, there's no turning back." The next few hours will determine everything. She looked at Ethan intently. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" Ethan's response was quiet but firm. "Music helped me survive in darkness. But now I want to see the light again. I want to see the music being born." His hands, which had been his only connection to the world of light, lay still in his lap, ready to risk everything for the chance to regain what was lost. In the days leading up to Ethan's surgery, the Carter mansion witnessed a profound transformation in its family dynamics. The evening rituals evolved organically. Emma would practice until dinner, Michael would return from work early to join them, and Ethan would offer musical guidance that increasingly felt like fatherly advice. Martha observed these changes with quiet satisfaction, noting how their meals had shifted from silent affairs to warm family gatherings. The greenhouse, once Ethan's solitary refuge, became the heart of their growing connection. Emma began leaving small gifts for him: a smooth stone that felt like a piano key, a dried rose that carried the memory of summer performances, handwritten notes in clumsy braille that she'd learned secretly. Each gesture built a bridge across the years of isolation. Michael discovered new aspects of his role as Emma's adoptive father. He found himself attending parent-teacher conferences with unprecedented enthusiasm, proudly displaying Emma's music competition certificates in his office, and learning to navigate the complex emotional landscape of raising a teenage daughter. His business associates noted the change in him. The corporate titan had softened, though his decisions remained just as sharp. Late one night, during a thunderstorm that rattled the greenhouse windows, Emma had a nightmare about her time at the orphanage. Her cries brought both Michael and Ethan to her room, their protective instincts overriding usual boundaries. They found themselves sharing stories until dawn: Michael about their own parents, Ethan about his early struggles with music, Emma about her mother's teachings. Martha brought hot chocolate, and the night became a turning point in their bonding. The preparation for Ethan's surgery created unexpected opportunities for connection. Emma took it upon herself to learn about his condition, reading medical journals and asking intelligent questions that impressed Dr. Thompson. Michael found himself explaining complex medical terms to her, their heads bent together over research papers, united in their concern for Ethan. Martha's role evolved beyond that of a housekeeper. She became the family's emotional anchor, knowing when to offer comfort and when to step back. Her Sunday dinners became a tradition, the table set with fine china that had gathered dust for years. She taught Emma old family recipes, sharing stories of the mansion's happier days as they cooked together. Family game nights emerged spontaneously, with Emma reading cards for Ethan and Michael attempting to learn simple piano duets. Their laughter, hesitant at first, grew more natural with each passing evening. The mansion's halls, which had forgotten the sound of joy, gradually relearned the echoes of happiness. Ethan's music lessons with Emma deepened into something more meaningful than teacher and student. He began sharing stories about his performances, his travels, his dreams of opening a music school, dreams that had been buried with his sight but were slowly resurging. Emma absorbed these tales with growing understanding of the man behind the music. But Michael found himself documenting these moments, secretly recording their piano sessions, taking photographs of quiet moments in the greenhouse. He created a family album, their first, filling it with images of their unconventional but growing bond. The empty frames that had lined the mansion's walls for years began to display new memories. The approach of autumn brought college preparation discussions. Emma's musical talent had caught the attention of several prestigious conservatories, and Michael threw himself into researching programs. Ethan, despite his anxiety about the upcoming surgery, contributed his knowledge of different music schools, his pride in Emma's potential evident in every recommendation. Their weekends developed a comfortable rhythm. Saturday mornings began with Emma practicing while Michael read the newspaper and Ethan offered occasional musical commentary. Afternoons might find them in the garden, Emma describing the changing colors to Ethan while Michael and Martha worked on restoration projects for the greenhouse. Even the mansion itself seemed to respond to the strengthening family bonds. Rooms that had been closed for years were opened and refreshed. The library became a favorite evening gathering spot, with Emma doing homework while Michael handled business calls and Ethan listened to musical recordings. Martha would bring tea and cookies, lingering longer each time as the distinction between staff and family gently blurred. Through it all, music remained their common language, whether it was Emma and Ethan working on a challenging piece, Michael humming along to their practice sessions, or Martha singing old lullabies as she worked. The mansion had rediscovered its voice. The approaching surgery cast a shadow over their happiness, but it also strengthened their determination to face whatever came as a united family. The morning of Ethan's surgery dawned with an unsettling stillness. The Carter mansion's greenhouse stood empty, its piano silent for the first time in months. In Boston's Metropolitan Hospital, the family gathered in a private waiting room, each lost in their own thoughts, as Ethan was prepared for the procedure. Dr. Thompson's final briefing was methodical but carried undertones of concern. The procedure will take approximately 6 hours, she explained. We'll be monitoring neural responses throughout. If we detect any adverse reactions, especially in the areas controlling fine motor skills, we'll need to make immediate decisions. Emma sat at a small keyboard the hospital had provided, her fingers moving soundlessly over the keys, practicing the piece she'd composed for Ethan's recovery. Michael noticed how her shoulders tensed each time medical staff entered the room, how her eyes searched their faces for any hint of news. The first 3 hours passed in tense silence. Martha kept busy arranging and rearranging the items they'd brought: fresh clothes, Ethan's favorite recordings, the smooth stone Emma had given him for luck. Michael paced, his usual corporate composure cracking with each passing hour. Then came the first complication. Dr. Thompson emerged from the operating room, her surgical mask pulled down, her expression grave. We're encountering unexpected inflammation around the optic nerve, she reported. The pressure is higher than we anticipated, and it's affecting nearby neural pathways. The technical terms washed over them, but the concern in her voice was clear. They needed to make a decision: proceed with the original plan and risk permanent damage to Ethan's motor functions, or halt the procedure, leaving him not only blind but with the knowledge that their one chance had failed. Emma's fingers stopped their silent practice. His music, she whispered. If he loses that too, she couldn't finish the thought. Michael pulled her close, feeling her shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. Martha stood by the window, her prayers a quiet murmur in the sterile hospital air. The decision fell to Michael as next of kin. Dr. Thompson needed an answer within minutes. The longer they waited, the greater the risks either way. He thought of Ethan at the piano, of the passion that had survived even in darkness, of the connection he'd formed with Emma through teaching. "What would your surgical team do if this was their family member?" Michael asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Doctor." Thompson's answer was measured but direct. "We'd proceed. The inflammation pattern suggests the pressure might decrease once we complete this phase, but I have to be clear, there are no guarantees." Michael signed the consent form, his signature unusually shaky. As Dr. Thompson returned to the operating room, Emma began to play softly on the keyboard Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor, the piece that had first connected her to the Carter family. The next 2 hours brought more complications. Ethan's blood pressure dropped dangerously low. The neural monitoring showed erratic patterns. Each update from the surgical team carried the weight of potential tragedy. Martha's prayers grew more fervent, her rosary beads clicking softly in counterpoint to Emma's continued playing. Near the 5-hour mark, alarms began blaring from the operating room. Medical staff rushed past the waiting area, their urgent movements a blur of surgical greens. Dr. Thompson's voice could be heard calling for emergency medications. The family stood frozen, united in their helplessness. Emma's playing faltered, then stopped entirely. She turned to Michael, her face pale. "I can't lose another father," she said, the word father slipping out unconsciously. "Not when I've just found him." The revelation hung in the air, unacknowledged but profound. The crisis peaked as the 6th hour approached. Ethan's heart had developed an irregular rhythm, compromising blood flow to his brain. The surgical team worked frantically to stabilize him while completing the delicate neural procedures. Every minute brought new challenges, new decisions, new risks. In the waiting room, Michael held Emma as she finally broke down, her tears soaking his expensive suit. Martha maintained her vigil by the window, watching the sun set over Boston's skyline. The city lights began to twinkle, each one a reminder of the vision they were fighting to restore. Dr. Thompson appeared again, looking exhausted but focused. "We're entering the final phase," she said. "The next 30 minutes will determine everything. I need you to understand, even if we succeed in restoring some vision, the trauma of these complications might have affected his ability to play. We won't know until he recovers consciousness." The news hit them like a physical blow. They had prepared for the possibility of failed vision restoration, but the threat to Ethan's music struck at the core of who he was. Emma returned to the keyboard, her tears falling silently as she played the piece she had composed for him, as if the music itself could guide him back to them. While the surgical team fought to stabilize Ethan, Emma made a decision that would change everything. Leaving the small keyboard in the waiting room, she approached the nurse's station with unusual determination. "Is there a piano anywhere in the hospital?" she asked, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. The head nurse, touched by the girl's presence throughout the crisis, mentioned the grand piano in the hospital's atrium. It was used for charity events and to provide comfort to patients and families. Within minutes, Michael understood his daughter's intention and made a few quiet phone calls to hospital administration. Permission was granted and Emma set up in the atrium directly below the surgical floor. The space's natural acoustics would carry the music through the building's central core. As she sat at the piano, Martha draped Ethan's favorite scarf across the music stand, a touch of home in the sterile hospital environment. She began with the piece she'd composed for Ethan, the one she'd been practicing silently all day. The opening notes floated upward, gentle but clear, a musical lifeline reaching toward the operating room. Hospital staff paused in their rounds, drawn by the unexpected beauty piercing the institutional silence. As she played, Emma wove together themes from her life with Ethan, fragments of the pieces they'd practiced together, echoes of his pre-accident compositions, melodies that spoke of their shared journey. The music told their story, two lost souls who had found each other through the universal language of piano. Patients emerged from their rooms, wheeled out by nurses or family members. The atrium slowly filled with people, drawn by the raw emotion in the performance. Emma played on, oblivious to her growing audience, focused only on sending her message upward to where Ethan lay fighting for more than just his sight. In the operating room, Dr. Thompson noticed a subtle change in Ethan's vital signs. The erratic patterns began to stabilize, his heart rhythm steadying as the familiar music reached him even through sedation. The surgical team worked with renewed focus, the piano providing a steady soundtrack to their efforts. Emma transitioned into Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor, the piece that had first revealed her presence in the greenhouse. Her interpretation had matured in the months since, shaped by Ethan's teaching and her own growing emotional depth. The performance spoke of hope, of family, of love that transcends darkness. Michael stood at the atrium's railing, watching his daughter pour her heart into the music. He saw in her playing all the strength she'd developed since coming to them, no longer the frightened girl seeking shelter, but a young woman fighting for her family with the weapons she knew best: dedication and music. Hospital staff began spreading the word about the young pianist in the atrium. Others joined the audience, doctors on break, families from other floors, maintenance workers pausing in their rounds. The music provided a moment of beauty in a place often marked by anxiety and pain. As the surgery entered its final crucial phase, Emma began the piece she'd been secretly working on, a complex arrangement combining elements of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. No, two with themes from Ethan's own compositions. It was technically demanding, pushing the limits of her ability, but she played with a passion that transcended technical perfection. Martha noticed people wiping away tears, moved by the obvious emotion in the performance. The atrium had become a sanctuary, the music a shared prayer for the unknown patient 7 floors above. Some listeners closed their eyes, others held hands with strangers, all connected by the universal language flowing from Emma's fingers. In the operating room, Dr. Thompson worked through the final delicate procedures as the music drifted up. The surgical team moved in perfect synchronization, as if choreographed by the piano's rhythm. Ethan's vital signs remained stable, his body seemingly responding to the familiar melodies. Emma lost all sense of time as she played, her repertoire flowing from one piece to another. She played everything she and Ethan had worked on together, each note carrying memories of their lessons, his guidance, their growing bond. The music became a bridge across consciousness, reaching for him through layers of sedation and uncertainty. The performance reached its peak as she returned to her original composition, now transformed by the emotion of the moment. The piece had evolved from a simple thank you into a complex expression of family love, fear, hope, and determination. The atrium fell completely silent except for the piano, every listener held captive by the story being told through music. As the final notes faded, Emma remained at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. The audience sat motionless, reluctant to break the spell. Then, from somewhere in the gathered crowd, a single person began to applaud. The applause spread, building into a wave of support and appreciation that filled the atrium and echoed upward. The story of Emma's performance spread through the hospital like wildfire. By midnight, social media was buzzing with videos taken by staff and visitors. Local news stations picked up the story young pianist plays for hours during father's surgery. The word father caught Michael's attention. Somehow, the truth had emerged naturally, recognized by strangers before their own family had fully acknowledged it. Dr. Thompson emerged from surgery near dawn, exhausted but smiling. The music, she said, it helped. His vital signs stabilized every time we could hear the piano. I've never seen anything quite like it. She explained that while the procedure was complete, the next 24 hours would be critical. The hospital administration, moved by the previous night's events, arranged for the grand piano to be moved closer to Ethan's recovery room. Emma's vigil continued there, her playing softer now but no less meaningful. Hospital staff began timing their rounds to pass by during her performances, drawing strength from the music that filled the otherwise silent corridors. News of the Carter family's situation reached Millbrook Academy. Victoria Blackwood, watching the viral videos of Emma playing, felt the first stirrings of shame. She organized her fellow students, and soon the school's entire music department was planning a benefit concert in support of their classmate's family. The local music community rallied as well. Former students of Ethan's, scattered across the country, began sharing stories online of his impact on their lives. Some traveled to Boston, bringing instruments to join Emma's musical vigil. The hospital corridor became an impromptu concert hall filled with chamber music played by musicians whose careers Ethan had helped shape. Michael watched in amazement as support poured in from unexpected sources. His business competitors sent encouraging messages. The orphanage board, faced with public attention, launched an investigation into Emma's mistreatment. Rebecca Wells, the administrator who had accused Emma of theft, resigned under pressure. Martha coordinated everything from her post near Ethan's room, organizing the growing stream of well-wishers and musicians. She witnessed how music was healing not just Ethan, but everyone it touched. Patients from other floors requested to be wheeled past during performances. Medical staff reported improved recovery rates on the entire floor. As dawn broke on the second day, Emma was playing softly when she noticed Ethan's fingers moving slightly, conducting along with her music. Dr. Thompson observed this response with cautious optimism. The neural pathways controlling fine motor skills appear to be intact, she noted. It's a promising sign. The revelation of Ethan's true relationship to Emma became public when a journalist discovered old concert programs featuring both Ethan and Sarah Mitchell. The story captured public imagination, a renowned pianist discovering his long-lost daughter through music, their connection surviving even through his blindness. Rather than shy away from the publicity, Michael decided to embrace it for a greater purpose. He announced the establishment of the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Musical Education, designed to provide opportunities for talented young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. The announcement triggered a wave of donations from across the music world. Victoria Blackwood's father, moved by the story and his daughter's change of heart, became one of the first major donors. The foundation's first project would be the renovation of St. Catherine's Home for Children, transforming it into a space where music could flourish. Emma continued playing through it all, drawing strength from the community that had formed around her family. Her repertoire expanded to include pieces requested by other patients, their families, and the growing number of musicians who came to support them. Each performance seemed to bring Ethan closer to consciousness. The most touching moment came when one of Ethan's former students, now a renowned composer, premiered a piece written specifically for the occasion. The composition incorporated themes from Ethan's own works, Sarah's favorite pieces, and Emma's recent performances. But as the music filled the hospital corridor, those present felt they were witnessing the healing power of art in its purest form. Dr. Thompson's team monitored Ethan's responses carefully, noting how his brain activity increased during certain pieces. The medical staff began timing their procedures to coincide with the music, finding that his body responded better during these moments. The discovery led to discussions about incorporating music therapy more formally into recovery programs. By the third day, the impromptu musical gathering had evolved into something larger than anyone expected. Musicians from the Boston Symphony Orchestra performed in shifts. Music students from local conservatories volunteered to play. The hospital corridor became a testament to the universal language of music and its power to unite strangers in hope. The initial elation of Ethan surviving the surgery gave way to a harrowing period of recovery. The first signs were subtle tremors in his hands when he tried to reach for water, moments of confusion during brief periods of consciousness, and most troublingly, an inability to distinguish between light and shadow despite Dr. Thompson's assurances that the optic nerve showed signs of healing. Emma's music continued, but now it carried notes of anxiety as she watched Ethan struggle. His fingers would often move in response to familiar pieces, yet when he tried to speak, his words came out slurred and disconnected. The medical team maintained their cautious optimism, but the sight of the once graceful pianist, unable to control his own hands, sent waves of distress through the family. The complications manifested in unexpected ways. Ethan developed severe headaches that made even the softest music unbearable at times. The very thing that had always brought him comfort now caused pain. And Emma was forced to stop playing, and the silence that fell over his hospital room seemed to mock their hopes for recovery. Michael noticed changes in his brother's personality, flashes of anger, moments of deep depression, and most worryingly, periods where Ethan seemed to retreat completely into himself. The doctors explained these as normal post-surgery responses, but to those who knew him, it was clear that Ethan was battling demons far darker than physical pain. Late one night, during a moment of clarity, Ethan confessed his deepest fear to Martha. "What if this was a mistake?" he whispered. "I had learned to live without sight, but if I can't play anymore." The words trailed off, but the implication was clear: he would rather remain blind than lose his connection to music. The physical therapy sessions became battlegrounds of frustration. Ethan's hands, once capable of the most delicate musical phrases, now struggled with basic exercises. Each failed attempt to control his fingers sent him deeper into despair. The therapist remained encouraging, but progress was agonizingly slow. Emma watched these sessions from the doorway, her heart breaking as she saw her teacher, her father, fight against his own body. She tried to encourage him by describing new musical pieces she was learning, but his response was often a bitter smile and turned head. The connection they had built through music seemed to be fraying. Dr. Thompson's updates became more guarded. While the surgery itself had been successful in repairing the optic nerve damage, the complications had created new challenges. The inflammation was taking longer to subside than expected, and there were concerns about potential long-term effects on his motor skills. The hospital room began to feel like a prison. Ethan refused visitors beyond immediate family, rejected attempts at conversation, and seemed to sink deeper into depression with each passing day. The medical staff spoke in whispers about the need for psychological intervention, but Ethan stubbornly refused to see a therapist. Martha found him one morning, tears streaming down his face as he tried repeatedly to pick up a spoon, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "I'm trapped in a new kind of darkness," he said, his voice breaking. "Before, at least I had my music. Now what am I?" Michael watched helplessly as his brother withdrew further into himself. The strong-willed musician who had fought through years of blindness was disappearing before their eyes, replaced by a man who seemed to have lost not just his sight and coordination, but his very will to recover. Emma's attempts to reach him through their shared love of music met with increasing resistance. "Please," he would say, his voice harsh with pain. "No more music. I can't bear to hear what I might never play again." Each rejection felt like a physical blow to Emma, who had come to depend on music as their primary means of communication. The fragile peace of Ethan's recovery was shattered when Rebecca Wells, the former administrator of St. Catherine's, reappeared with renewed accusations. She had seen the media coverage of Emma's hospital performances and, facing professional ruin after her forced resignation, decided to launch a vindictive counterattack. Local newspapers picked up the story. Former orphanage administrator questions prodigies past the articles, dredged up the old theft allegations, now embellished with claims about Emma's manipulation of the wealthy Carter family. Rebecca Wells painted a picture of a calculating young girl who had orchestrated her own adoption through deception. The timing couldn't have been worse. Victoria Blackwood's father, who had pledged substantial support to the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, began to waver. Other donors expressed concerns. The scandal threatened not just Emma's reputation, but the entire foundation's future and the planned renovation of St. Catherine's. Emma faced whispers and stares during her hospital visits. Some staff members who had been moved by her performances days earlier now regarded her with suspicion. The pressure became so intense that she began having panic attacks, her hands shaking too much to play the piano that had been her solace. The situation escalated when several former orphanage staff members, seeking to protect their own positions, corroborated Wells's stories. They produced documentation later proved to be falsified, suggesting a pattern of manipulative behavior. The media seized upon these details, turning Emma's vigil at her father's bedside into something sinister. Michael faced questions about his judgment in adopting Emma. Business associates suggested that the scandal might affect his company's reputation. Even some board members of the Sarah Mitchell Foundation began to distance themselves, concerned about the controversy's impact on their own standing in the community. Martha discovered Emma one evening, trying to pack her belongings secretly. "I'm making everything worse," the girl sobbed. "Maybe if I leave, the foundation can continue its work. Those children at St. Catherine's shouldn't suffer because of me." The housekeeper held her close, feeling the tremors of suppressed tears. The most painful blow came when media outlets began investigating Sarah Mitchell's past, suggesting that Emma's mother had been involved in financial irregularities at the music school where she taught. These baseless allegations threatened to tarnish not just Emma's reputation, but her mother's memory as well. Victoria Blackwood, in an unexpected turn, became one of Emma's strongest defenders. Having witnessed firsthand Emma's genuine talent and character, she spoke out against the accusations. Her stance created a rift with her father, but inspired other students to rally around their classmate. The hospital administration, pressured by concerned donors, suggested that Emma's presence might be disruptive to other patients. The piano was removed from the recovery floor, ostensibly for renovations. The message was clear: the girl who had brought music and hope to countless patients was no longer welcome. Ethan, still struggling with his own recovery, became aware of the situation through fragments of overheard conversations. His initial reaction was withdrawal, the added stress seemingly pushing him further into depression. But something about the attacks on Emma's character and her mother's memory began to stir his protective instincts. As Emma's world crumbled around her, she maintained one ritual, sitting silently by Ethan's bedside each evening, her fingers moving in practiced patterns above her lap, playing invisible melodies that she could no longer share aloud. The gesture, small and private, spoke of a dedication that no accusation could tarnish. Through it all, the music box that had sparked the original theft accusation remained missing, its absence a symbol of everything Emma had lost and found. Rebecca Wells claimed to have documentation proving it had belonged to another child, but refused to produce the actual item or the supposed original owner. The crisis reached a breaking point when Wells announced her intention to file a formal complaint with Child Services, challenging the legitimacy of Emma's adoption. The threat struck at the heart of the family bonds that had formed over the past months, threatening to legally separate Emma from both her newfound father and the man she had just discovered was her biological parent. The culmination of physical struggles and Emma's crisis pushed Ethan into a darkness deeper than his original blindness. He began refusing all visitors, including Emma and Michael, communicating only through Martha when absolutely necessary. The hospital room, despite its medical equipment and monitoring devices, took on the same isolating atmosphere as his old wing of the mansion. His physical therapy sessions became exercises in futility. Rather than engage with the therapist's encouragement, Ethan would sit motionless, his hands resting uselessly in his lap. The doctors noted a dangerous pattern. His withdrawal wasn't just emotional, his vital signs were deteriorating, as if his body were following his mind's retreat from life. The breaking point came during a routine neurological assessment. When asked to attempt a simple piano finger exercise, Ethan exploded in frustration, sweeping medical instruments off the bedside table. "Don't you understand?" he shouted at the startled medical team. "I'm not just failing myself anymore. I'm failing her. I can't be the father she needs. I can't even defend her." Martha found him later that night, tears streaming down his face as he attempted to play air piano, his fingers trembling and uncoordinated. "I should have recognized her sooner," he whispered. "I should have known Sarah's touch in her playing. Now I might never see her face, never play with her again, and she's fighting battles I'm too weak to help her with." Dr. Thompson grew increasingly concerned about the correlation between his emotional state and physical recovery. The inflammation around his optic nerve, which had been showing signs of improvement, began to worsen again. His body's healing seemed directly tied to his will to recover, which was rapidly fading. Michael attempted to bridge the gap between brother and daughter, bringing recordings of Emma's performances to Ethan's room. But Ethan would turn his face to the wall, his voice harsh with self-loathing. "Take it away. I don't deserve to hear it. I abandoned her mother, failed to protect her, and now I can't even offer her the one thing we shared: music." The hospital's psychiatric team recommended immediate intervention, warning of severe depression that could compromise his entire recovery. But Ethan refused medication, rejected counseling, and retreated further into himself. His only interaction became the daily updates from Martha about Emma's situation, each new challenge reported adding to his burden of perceived failure. Emma, despite her own struggles with the accusations against her, tried desperately to reach him. She would sit outside his room, playing finger exercises silently on the windowsill, hoping he would sense her presence. But Ethan remained unresponsive, the gulf between them widening with each passing day. The physical symptoms of his depression manifested in alarming ways. His blood pressure became erratic, his sleep patterns disturbed. The tremors in his hands worsened, and he began experiencing severe headaches that the doctors couldn't fully explain. It was as if his body were manifesting the chaos in his mind. Martha observed how he would touch the raised dots of Braille music sheets without reading them, his fingers tracing patterns that once brought comfort but now seemed to cause only pain. The greenhouse's daily updates about blooming flowers and changing seasons, which had once been his connection to the outside world, now went unread, piling up on his bedside table. During one particularly dark night, he confessed to Martha his deepest fear: "What if I recover my sight only to see disappointment in her eyes? What if she looks at me and sees not a father, but a coward who hid in darkness while she fought his battles?" The words came between sobs that shook his entire frame. The medical team began discussing the possibility of moving him to a specialized facility for depression treatment. Dr. Thompson argued that his physical recovery was being severely compromised by his emotional state. But the suggestion of another move, another change, seemed to push Ethan even further into withdrawal. Michael found himself fighting battles on two fronts, protecting Emma from her accusers while watching his brother slip away into a depression that seemed as impenetrable as his former physical blindness. The strong-willed musician who had survived years of darkness was disappearing, replaced by a shell of a man who had lost not just his music, but his very will to heal. The turning point came through Martha's dedication to maintaining the mansion during the family's absence. While cleaning Ethan's wing, she discovered a hidden compartment in his old desk, triggered accidentally as she dusted its ornate carvings. Inside lay a collection of letters, yellowed with age, still in their original envelopes, all addressed to Ethan Carter from Sarah Mitchell. The letters, spanning several months, told a story that changed everything. Sarah had indeed written to Ethan about her pregnancy, but the letters had been intercepted by his then-manager, Gerald Thompson, who feared a child would derail Ethan's rising career. The final letter, dated just weeks before Sarah's death, contained the missing music box, a gift intended for their unborn daughter. Martha's hands trembled as she read Sarah's last words: "Ethan, if you're reading this, I hope you can forgive me for keeping our child a secret for so long. The music box plays our duet from that last night in Paris. I've had it modified to include a secret compartment, where I've placed documentation of Emma's rightful inheritance, both financial and musical. She deserves to know her father's legacy." Gerald Thompson, now a prominent figure in the classical music world, had orchestrated more than just the concealment of letters. Bank statements found with the correspondence revealed that he had systematically diverted funds from Sarah's music school account, creating the appearance of financial irregularities that would later taint her reputation. The most damning evidence came in the form of a confession letter from Thompson himself, written after Ethan's accident but never sent. In it, he admitted to orchestrating Sarah's professional downfall when she threatened to expose his actions, forcing her into poverty during her pregnancy. The stress had contributed to her declining health and eventual death. The music box itself contained proof of Emma's inheritance, legal documents, photographs, and most importantly, a recording of Sarah and Ethan performing together, with Sarah's voice explaining the truth to their unborn child. The recording had captured their last duet, the same piece Emma had played instinctively on her first night in the greenhouse. Martha rushed the evidence to Michael at the hospital. He immediately contacted his legal team, who began unraveling the web of deception. The investigation revealed that Rebecca Wells had been in contact with Thompson recently, suggesting a coordinated effort to discredit Emma and prevent the truth from emerging. Victoria Blackwood, still advocating for Emma, discovered through her father's connections that Thompson had made substantial donations to St. Catherine's Home, specifically to maintain control over information about Emma's past. Wells had been his willing accomplice, using her position to suppress any inquiry into Emma's background. The documentation proved not only Emma's legitimate claim to her musical heritage, but also exposed the systematic campaign to keep her separated from her father. Thompson had monitored her progress at the orphanage through Wells, ensuring she would never learn the truth about her parents. Among the papers was a deed to a small property in Paris, the studio, where Sarah and Ethan had spent their last days together. Sarah had maintained it through a trust, hoping it would one day belong to their child. The deed came with a letter explaining how the studio still contained their old piano, waiting for Emma to claim her birthright. Perhaps most touching was a collection of composition notebooks, filled with pieces Sarah and Ethan had written together during their brief time as a couple. The margins contained their notes to each other, dreams for their future, and eventually Sarah's private messages to their unborn child. These compositions revealed the depth of their musical and personal connection. The final piece of evidence was a video recording from the Paris studio's security system, showing Thompson removing boxes of documents shortly after Sarah's death. This explained the missing evidence that had allowed him to create a false narrative about her financial troubles and professional reputation. Martha organized the evidence carefully, knowing that each piece would help restore not just Emma's reputation but also the honor of both her parents. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, waiting in Ethan's own study, preserved by Sarah's foresight and discovered through Martha's diligence. Gerald Thompson's world began unraveling during a prestigious music festival in Boston, where he was serving as chief adjudicator. Michael Carter, accompanied by his legal team, confronted him publicly with the evidence. The timing was deliberate. Many of the industry's most influential figures were present to witness Thompson's fall from grace. "You stole more than money," Michael declared, his voice carrying across the festival hall. "You stole years that a father and daughter should have shared. You destroyed a woman's reputation and left her child an orphan." The assembled musicians, many of whom had known both Sarah and Ethan, listened in stunned silence. Rebecca Wells, summoned to explain her role, broke down under questioning. She revealed how Thompson had paid her to keep Emma isolated at the orphanage, to discourage her musical pursuits, and to create false records that would make any future claims of inheritance appear fraudulent. Her confession, recorded by Michael's attorneys, provided the final link in the chain of evidence. The confrontation reached its climax when Victoria Blackwood stepped forward with additional evidence. Her father's banking connections had uncovered offshore accounts where Thompson had hidden funds stolen from Sarah's music school. The revelation sparked a federal investigation into years of financial manipulation within the classical music industry. Emma, watching from the side of the hall, finally understood the full scope of the conspiracy that had shaped her life. The missing music box, the false accusations, the years of isolation, all had been orchestrated to keep her from discovering her true heritage. As Thompson attempted to defend himself, she walked to the festival's grand piano. Without a word, she began to play the duet from the Paris recording, the piece her parents had performed together before Thompson tore them apart. The melody carried across the hall, silencing Thompson's protestations. Those present recognized the distinctive style, a perfect blend of Sarah's delicacy and Ethan's passion. Martha had brought Ethan to the festival against medical advice, believing he needed to face this moment. As Emma played, something shifted in his expression. The music penetrated the fog of his depression, connecting him to both his past love and his present responsibility. His fingers began moving in sync with Emma's performance, muscle memory awakening. Thompson, watching his carefully constructed world collapse, made a desperate attempt to maintain control. He claimed that his actions had been meant to protect Ethan's career, that Sarah had agreed to the arrangement. But the letters proved otherwise, each one documenting his systematic destruction of a family. The most powerful moment came when Emma reached the part of the duet that had been Ethan's solo. She paused, and in the silence, Ethan rose from his wheelchair. Despite his trembling hands and uncertain steps, he made his way to the piano. Father and daughter, united by music and truth, completed the piece together. Their performance became a public reclaiming of their story. Industry professionals who had accepted Thompson's version of events for years now witnessed the undeniable musical connection between Ethan and his daughter. The similarity in their technique, their emotional interpretation, spoke louder than any DNA test. Victoria's father, moved by the truth and his daughter's role in exposing it, announced his bank would establish a fund to investigate similar cases of financial fraud in arts organizations. The scandal had revealed systemic problems that had allowed Thompson's manipulation to go undetected for so long. Martha watched as the family she had helped protect finally confronted their demons. She saw how Emma's shoulders straightened with each revelation, how Ethan's hands grew steadier as he played. The truth, though painful, was setting them free. As Thompson was led away by federal agents, he turned to make one final statement. But Emma's music drowned out his words, her playing now strong and confident, no longer the hesitant notes of an orphan seeking belonging. She had found her voice, her heritage, and her father. The confrontation marked more than just the exposure of past wrongs. It represented a turning point in Ethan's recovery, giving him a purpose that transcended his physical challenges. His daughter needed him not just as a teacher or a father, but as a partner in reclaiming their shared legacy. The aftermath of Thompson's exposure brought a wave of healing that touched far more lives than just the Carter family. Emma's first act, after the truth emerged, was to return to St. Catherine's home. Not in shame as Wells had intended, but in triumph, bearing the newly established Sarah Mitchell Foundation's plans for renovation and musical education. The children who had once shunned her gathered in the old chapel, where Emma played her mother's compositions on the same upright piano that had been her only comfort during darker days. This time her music carried not loneliness but hope. She announced scholarships for every child who showed musical interest, turning her personal victory into an opportunity for others. Victoria Blackwood's transformation from bully to ally became complete when she volunteered to teach basic piano lessons at St. Catherine's. Her example inspired other students from Millbrook Academy to join the volunteer program, bridging the social gap that had once seemed insurmountable. The music rooms that would replace the old storage spaces would bear plaques honoring both Sarah Mitchell and the students who helped make it possible. Ethan's recovery took on new meaning as he focused on helping other children who had faced similar injustices. His hands, though still not fully steady, could guide young fingers on piano keys. Each small success in teaching became a step in his own healing. The tremors decreased as his confidence grew, his body responding to the renewed sense of purpose. Martha discovered a new role as keeper of the family's story. She organized Sarah's letters, music sheets, and photographs into an archive that would inspire future generations. The greenhouse, once Ethan's prison, was transformed into a living museum where students could learn about music's power to heal and unite. Rebecca Wells, facing the consequences of her actions, chose a path of redemption. She volunteered to testify against Thompson and others involved in similar schemes across different orphanages. Her insider knowledge helped authorities uncover a network of corruption that had exploited vulnerable children for years. Though her past actions couldn't be undone, her cooperation helped prevent future injustices. The Paris studio, preserved by Sarah's foresight, became a sanctuary for young musicians who couldn't afford proper practice spaces. Emma and Ethan traveled there together, their first father-daughter trip, to restore the old piano and establish a scholarship program in Sarah's memory. The small apartment above the studio would host visiting students, creating an international community of young artists. Michael's role evolved beyond that of protector and provider. He found himself drawn more deeply into the musical world, not as a performer, but as a bridge between art and opportunity. His business acumen, combined with his newfound appreciation for music's transformative power, made the Sarah Mitchell Foundation a force for positive change in arts education. The most profound transformation was in the relationship between Emma and Ethan. As his sight gradually improved, every new visual discovery became a shared joy. The first time he clearly saw her smile, the moment he could distinguish the color of her eyes, so like Sarah's, each milestone was celebrated with music. Their duets evolved, incorporating their experiences of loss and reunion into increasingly complex emotional expressions. During a special concert marking the Foundation's launch, Emma premiered a piece she had composed titled Redemption in D Major. The composition told their family's story, beginning with Sarah's love theme from the Paris recordings, moving through darker passages representing their years of separation, and culminating in a triumphant reunion that brought together elements of both parents' musical styles. The event also served as an opportunity for public reconciliation. Victoria performed a duet with Emma, symbolizing the transformation of their rivalry into friendship. Former orphanage staff members who had opposed Wells's actions were honored for their quiet resistance. Even some of Thompson's former associates came forward to make amends, offering support for the Foundation's mission. The music box that had sparked so much controversy found its rightful place in the greenhouse's museum. Its melody, the duet from Paris, played daily as students arrived for lessons. The secret compartment, now empty of its crucial documents, held new treasures, small notes from children describing their musical dreams, each one a testament to the legacy of hope that had emerged from darkness. The circle of healing widened beyond the immediate family. Other orphanages reached out for help implementing music programs. Musicians who had faced similar exploitation found courage to tell their stories. The Carter Mansion, once a symbol of isolation, became a gathering place for those seeking to transform pain into art. The Carter Mansion's transformation into the Sarah Mitchell Academy of Music marked the beginning of a new era. The formal opening ceremony, held in the expanded greenhouse, brought together students from St. Catherine's Home, Millbrook Academy, and young musicians from across the country. Emma and Ethan performed the inaugural piece, a complex duet that showcased both their individual talents and their deep musical connection. Under Martha's supervision, the mansion's numerous rooms were converted into specialized teaching spaces. The grand salon became a recital hall, its ornate mirrors and crystal chandeliers reflecting the light of new dreams. Practice rooms lined the east wing, each equipped with different instruments to accommodate various musical interests. The former servants' quarters transformed into dormitories for residential students who couldn't afford housing. The greenhouse remained the heart of the academy. Its perfect acoustics and natural light made it ideal for masterclasses and special performances. The roses and orchids that had witnessed Ethan's years of isolation now bloomed more vibrantly than ever, as if responding to the constant flow of music and youthful energy. Victoria Blackwood convinced her father to donate state-of-the-art recording equipment, establishing a professional studio in what had once been Ethan's secluded wing. Students could now record their progress, create portfolios for conservatory applications, and learn the technical aspects of music production. The library, already extensive with generations of Carter family sheet music, expanded to include works from diverse musical traditions. Michael commissioned special editions with Braille notation, ensuring that visually impaired students could access the full curriculum. The collection grew to include Sarah's recovered compositions and Ethan's pre-accident works, providing students with unique learning materials. Emma took particular pride in designing the beginner's wing. Remembering her own early struggles, she created a welcoming space where young children could explore music without pressure. Colorful walls displayed musical notes, child-sized instruments filled bright corners, and a special area was dedicated to music therapy sessions. The Academy's admission policy reflected its founding spirit. Talent and passion were the only requirements. A robust scholarship program, funded through the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, ensured that financial circumstances would never prevent a promising student from attending. The student body became a vibrant mix of backgrounds and experiences, united by their love of music. Martha's role evolved into that of house mother for the residential students. Her apartments adjacent to the dormitories became a sanctuary where young musicians could find comfort and guidance. She maintained the tradition of Sunday dinners, now served to a much larger family of students and teachers. The mansion's grounds were landscaped to create outdoor performance spaces. A small amphitheater built near the greenhouse hosted summer concerts under the stars. Practice pavilions dotted the gardens, providing quiet spaces for students to work while surrounded by nature. The iron gates that had once symbolized isolation now stood permanently open, welcoming visitors to regular community concerts. As the Academy grew, it attracted master teachers from around the world. Many were drawn by the unique story of its founding and stayed for the special atmosphere that pervaded every corner of the property. The mansion, which had once echoed with silence, now resonated with scales, arpeggios, symphonies, and most importantly, laughter. 1 year after the Academy's opening, the Carter family gathered in the greenhouse for a private celebration. Ethan's vision had improved enough to see his daughter clearly for the first time, though he would always have some limitations. The moment he truly saw Emma's smile, so like Sarah's, brought tears to his eyes. Their musical connection, forged in darkness, had blossomed into something even more profound in the light. Michael watched his brother and daughter at the piano, marveling at how far they had come. The adoption papers, framed alongside Emma's first competition medals, hung in his study as a testament to how legal bonds had merely formalized what their hearts had already known. His role as Emma's adoptive father complemented, rather than competed with her relationship with Ethan. Martha prepared a special dinner featuring recipes from Sarah's old notebook, found among her papers in the Paris studio. The familiar taste brought back memories for Ethan, who shared stories of his time with Sarah that Emma had never heard. Each anecdote filled in pieces of her history, completing the picture of the mother she had lost too soon. Victoria, now a regular presence at family gatherings, brought a surprise. She had tracked down several of Sarah's former students who shared their own memories of Emma's mother. Their stories painted a picture of a passionate teacher who had passed on her love of music to countless students, just as Emma was doing now. The healing extended beyond the immediate family. Students from St. Catherine's Home, many now studying at the Academy, joined the celebration. They performed a piece composed collectively, each contributor adding their own voice to a symphony of redemption. The music spoke of pain transformed into purpose, isolation into community. Ethan and Emma premiered a new duet they had composed together, incorporating themes from Sarah's Paris recordings with their own experiences of loss and reunion. The piece moved through darkness into light, reflecting their journey from strangers to family. Their playing, once a means of communication when words failed, had evolved into a celebration of their bond. The greenhouse, decorated with fairy lights and filled with blooming flowers, no longer felt like a sanctuary of solitude. It had become the heart of a growing family that extended far beyond blood relations. Students, teachers, and supporters had created a community bound together by music and shared purpose. Michael unveiled a new addition to the Academy, a scholarship specifically for parent-child musical partnerships. Inspired by Ethan and Emma's story, it would support families seeking to heal through shared musical education. The announcement brought fresh tears to Ethan's eyes, understanding how their personal journey would help others. As evening fell, the family gathered around the piano one last time. Emma began playing the nocturne that had first revealed her presence in the greenhouse. Ethan joined in, their music weaving together in perfect harmony. Martha and Michael watched, their own hearts full, as father and daughter created something beautiful from the pieces of their broken past. 5 years after the Academy's founding, Emma stood on the stage at Carnegie Hall, preparing for her debut performance. In the audience, Ethan sat between Michael and Martha, his partially restored vision allowing him to witness his daughter's triumph. The program featured a special piece, a 3-part composition representing their family's journey, co-written by father and daughter. The Sarah Mitchell Academy had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Its graduates were performing in prestigious venues worldwide, many returning to teach and inspire new generations. The model of inclusive music education had been replicated in cities across the globe, each new school carrying forward the legacy of healing through music. The original greenhouse, where their story began, became a pilgrimage site for young musicians facing their own challenges. Its walls now displayed photographs chronicling the family's journey from Emma's first night seeking shelter to her Carnegie Hall debut. The piano where she and Ethan had first connected remained in its place of honor, still used for special performances. Victoria Blackwood had transformed her father's business empire into a major supporter of arts education, establishing similar programs in underprivileged communities. Her friendship with Emma proved that even the deepest prejudices could be overcome through understanding and shared passion. The annual Sarah Mitchell Festival, hosted at the Mansion, brought together musicians from around the world. Each year, a special performance honored students who had overcome significant obstacles to pursue their musical dreams. The festival always closed with Emma and Ethan performing the nocturne that had first united them. Martha, though officially retired, continued to maintain her apartments near the student dormitories. Her Sunday dinners became legendary, a tradition that new students eagerly anticipated. Her walls were covered with photographs of her children. The hundreds of young musicians who had found their way through the Academy's gates. Michael's business acumen had helped establish endowments ensuring the Academy's future, but his greatest satisfaction came from watching the family he had helped build flourish. His role as Emma's adoptive father complemented Ethan's biological connection, creating a unique bond that strengthened them all. As Emma took her final bow at Carnegie Hall, she glimpsed her mother's photograph displayed prominently on the piano. Sarah's dream of bringing music to those who needed it most had been realized beyond imagination. The legacy of love, perseverance, and healing through music would continue to touch lives for generations to come. If this story of music, family, and redemption touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own experiences of healing through art and music. Support our team's dedication to bringing you meaningful stories by subscribing to our channel, and help us reach more people by sharing this video with friends and family. Every like, comment, and share encourages us to continue creating content that celebrates the transformative power of love and determination. Join our community of storytellers and listeners as we explore more tales that remind us of humanity's resilience and capacity for healing.